Hello, and welcome to Property Matters, a weekly look at all matters property designed to be of interest to anyone who has an interest in property. And Property Matters, as you know, sponsored by Fairview International Property Consultancy and auctionproperty.co.uk. Each week we're looking at those big stories in the news that concern property, and we'd love you to get involved in the comments section below where you're watching us today, whether that be on Facebook or indeed YouTube. And of course, don't forget to like the page and subscribe so you get the notifications of when we're live. And you can email us, propertymatterstv@gmail.com. Joining us as always, it's our property expert, Joe Joshi. Morning, Joe.
Morning, Paul. Morning, everybody. Welcome to our weekly program, All Matters Property. You know, we love this subject of property, no matter what the time of the day is, rain, sun, shine, or storms, we don't mind. Property is what we talk about.
Indeed, and I suppose this is the perfect time, really. We're talking about the Easter break, of course, and the weather being good. The garden, of course, and we'll be looking at ways to add value to the home in our second story today. But the first thing we're going to look at today, Joe, is an interesting thing about the questions that you need to ask when you go for a viewing on a property. So, you know, if you get to talk to the vendor, great, but if you're talking to the agent, there's a number of questions that that you should ask. And of course, the first one that has been suggested here in this article is how long have you lived here? You know, so basically looking at the family or through the vendor to find out exactly why the person is wanting to move, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting. The thing with questions always is, and I'm going to go through the real viewing process here, because whilst with the best will in the world, there are lots of questions one should ask. More often than none, there's actually no questions asked. And some of the questions that were actually asked are probably completely off the wall and don't make any sense whatsoever to what the purpose of the exercise is. And really, as an agent or as a home owner who's looking to sell the property, one should always ask the questions to the viewer too, as much as the viewer should ask the questions to the seller. And more often than none, most viewers are very sort of coy and secretive about what they think and why they want to, because they don't want to give away any indication or signal as to whether they are interested or have an interest in the property or like it or dislike it, or want to give any illusions to perhaps the seller to say, or the agent for that matter of fact, because often a property that is vacant is probably being shown around by the agent at the time. And that also is a little bit of a cast on the agent, because the reason is that most agents don't actually bother to have a conversation either. So this is how the viewing tends to go. It's good morning, how are you? Thank you very much for coming along. Here's the key, open the door, and then they stand there like a bunch of lemons, waiting for some sort of miracle to happen. And then they go, and the most obvious is, and this is the living room. Yes, we are in the living room, and this is the dining room, and this is the kitchen. And we know that those are all those purposes that they are. And then we go up the stairs, and we're going up the stairs, and this is the landing. And from the landing, yeah, funny enough, this is the bathroom. This is the smallest bedroom, 2 and 3, and that's it really. And so what would you like to do? And that's kind of what generally happens at a viewing. Both from, actually, especially from an agent's point of view. From a seller's point of view, of course, the interesting thing about the seller is that they are always pointing out some of the most amazing things about the property that they think are just, you know, the sell things. Like, for example, this one's got 54 PowerPoints in this room. I mean, that's just amazing how many PowerPoints this room has. And you ask yourself, well, you know, what's that really all about? Why do I want to know there's got 54 PowerPoints? But because they again find it hard to have that conversation as to what it is that they want to do. And so there's no right or wrong way of doing a viewing, and there's certainly no right or wrong questions. It's about that comfort zone and how people feel, and it's the buy from the seller that is actually looking to sell, and the buy from the buyer who's walking through the door and going, I like it. But as you know, Paul, for as many programs as we've done, my first and foremost is always about the exterior. It's always, that first approach. It's the road, it's the drive, it's the whole approach. Forget about what we start asking about how long they've been living there and how many PowerPoints they've got. Those are almost irrelevant in my book until and at a point where when you're sort of looking at buying a property and you're driving. So I would suggest that you wind the tape back in your mind and actually start to approach the property from the time you drive down the road and ask yourself, is this a road that I'd like to live in? Is it got lots of cars? We covered a subject last week when people said that it was the different times of the day that they wanted to maybe view, because sometimes, if you're viewing during the day, there's probably not as many cars on the road. Perhaps early evening, because everyone's home, maybe there's more cars on the road. It kind of gives you a story about, what kind of area, what kind of road, what kind of people might be living in, the types of cars, sometimes tell the story of who it's going to be as well. So I always suggest that, you start to think about your home um, as you start to drive towards it. Look at the areas around you, the roads, the neighboring roads even, and the neighbors and the neighboring properties, and how they begin to start to look after themselves before ring the ring bell, which then answers on the mobile phone and tells you whether even the owner wants to let you in because you don't look right, because that's the way they now do, as opposed to the knock on the door and wipe the feet and in you go sort of situation. So times have changed, things have changed, but the basics have not changed at all. The basics are always about what something you wear and how it feels, and I'll cover that as we go on. But yes, how long have you lived here is a good question. And the reason why that question is a good question to ask is that it does give indications as to why the seller might be selling, what the problems they may have. They may have a uncomfortable situation with the neighbor. There may be something wrong with the property that they feel that might not be right, and they can't deal with it. They may feel that they're actually overcommitted. There may be personal circumstances. There may be a couple that have decided to go separate directions, and now one cannot afford to keep it. There's many reasons, but they're not always bad reasons. They don't have to be seen to be reasons why all of a sudden somebody, and therefore you're looking into something deeper perhaps than you really need to. So yeah, questions are important, but you also need to have substance of what the answers are going to be.
Yeah, and I guess when there's a question like that, it's going to depend on who your vendors are. If it's a young family with a growing pair of kids or something like that, then you'd expect that they may have only lived there a few years because they've outgrown the house, perhaps. But if it's an older empty nesting couple, for example, why are they suddenly looking to move? So the reasons can be vendor specific, I suppose, is the way to put it. But also, of course, you might find that if they've lived there happily for a number of years, then all of a sudden they want to go. You might want to ask another question as to, well, why suddenly are you, after being happy here for so many years, why are you going?
Yeah, I mean, these questions are relevant, but they are also personal to something. So, whilst I think that the chap who's put these questions together and given us some indication and good food for our program, I also think some of the questions may be a little bit personal and I think people won't open up until they think that you're actually going to go somewhere with this whole deal. What's the point of me telling you what my issues are and what I'm going for if you're not actually even remotely interested? I mean, I'm not going to waste my time and discuss the weather. In fact, they'll probably discuss the weather more than they would do anything else, as that is our British way of doing things. And those are the questions that are probably more regular. I mean, it's raining outside. Yes, it is, and so um, so those are the sort of things that people tend to do, but they are personal. And I think that people will take time to answer those questions. But I think my personal view is that you've got to go in there with your eyes wide open and look and see what are the reasons, what are the things that you think, and then maybe ask those questions as a conversation towards the end. If you feel that there's a buy-in from both, you like them. And do you know how many people actually buy a property because they like the person that was selling it?
Yeah.
It's quite a lot of people will buy a property because they like the person that was living there. I like to buy that property because I like that lady, and she was a really nice lady, and she was honest, and the house was kept really nicely. People buy for the most strangest and bizarre reasons. We
Mm.
don't know what
Mm.
those answers can be.
It's interesting actually because Scott Clay, who put this together, actually does say on the second question, you do need to be aware of the fact that for some people, these are going to be quite personal questions, particularly if it's a partnership splitting up, as you mentioned a moment ago, Joe. But you do need to respect the privacy. But it's interesting. So the second question is, why are you moving? Which is an interesting one because actually this is the question that may affect you a few years down the line once you've bought the property. So, for example, we're moving to be closer to good schools. Well, if you buy this property and then you decide to have a family, you're going to need in a few years to move to be near the good schools. So, very often, these can be the very reasons that they're moving will become your reasons to move in a few years. So, you need to think ahead, which is a really good point, I think. Obviously, they can be simple things like, for example, I'm being relocated with my work. I need to be out by the end of next month or something like that. So you probably even could do a bit of a deal if they've got an emergency deadline to sort of get out of a property with. But so that's quite an interesting question as well. Why are you moving?
Yeah, I mean, often schooling is a driver, and you can actually also value and look at the values of the homes based on the kind of schooling that is in the area. And schools have a catchment area, as it's known, and that drives prices as much as interest from people that want to be within those catchment areas to be able to qualify for their children to go to that particular school. And so sometimes people have done their journey of that particular school and they want to sell, and they know that they could get a good value, and the next person coming in is going to do exactly the same, and 2, 3, 4 years down the road it'll be back on the market again, and so forth, because that is the rotation of the sale of that particular property based on the schooling that they're in. But there are many, many, many other factors that are also considered important as to why somebody has chosen to buy or look into particular areas and particular properties. And there's a huge list of those now growing, and some new points added since the pandemic as well, as to why people want to move into those particular areas.
Mm. Um, it's also quite interesting to because obviously on the estate agent details you usually see um, details about local stations, shops, schools, public transport, that kind of thing. But it's quite interesting to actually ask about that from the actual vendor themselves, and hopefully you'll get a reasonably straight answer. Third question is, what are the neighbours like? Now this is a difficult one, isn't it? Because obviously they're going to be cagey if there's a problem. But I didn't realise, Joe, that they are legally obliged to inform you if they're aware of any formal complaints, such as a noise complaint about a neighbour, even if it wasn't them that made the complaint. Now, I didn't know that, did you?
Yes, I did. And if I didn't, then I'd be not doing my job properly. Um,
I just
the,
wanted to check.
yeah, thanks for that. It's some sort of examination for Joe Joshi
Yeah.
on a Sunday morning, of course. Thanks. Yes, in the CBS inquiries now, owners are obliged to declare um, any confrontation, any issues, any proceedings, any arguments, any listings that they may have listed with the local police, any disruptions, noise, and whatever goes above. Most people actually don't bother to do that, and actually it deters a lot of people from actually having arguments, Paul, because they know that at some stage it might have to come out in the wash, and that would have a detrimental value and sale on their property. So it becomes a huge issue for everybody, not just that particular property, but all the neighbouring properties in that area, because it's an inquiry that could be registered as part of the local search. And in the local search, it could show that there was some sort of evidence of proceedings that may have affected that particular neighbour. And this could be anything. It's not just the noisy neighbour or whatever. It could be a neighbour who is a complete and utter pain for many reasons for all the neighbours in the area. You may have recently seen an article in the news where a bloke next door stabbed the chap ultimately, and ended up going to prison for being a nuisance as a neighbour. So there are amazingly extreme circumstances that can occur from that particular situations. And all of the neighbours in that particular article, that news item, which was only a few weeks ago, all of the neighbours had issues with this one particular person. And so that whole area was blighted. And so you can imagine anyone that was looking to move into the area, having got that research or found out that information, is highly unlikely to want to live there.
Yeah, yeah,
And that creates a huge problem, not just morally, but financially, because who wants to buy a property at a extraordinary price with a neighbor that has become a pain? So those are really important. So yes, whilst you do want to go and probably beat the living daylights out of the chap next door, or whatever the circumstances might be, what you have to bear in mind that it does and can have severe consequences a bit further down the line. So a cooler head is perhaps required.
and of course, it doesn't necessarily have to be a human being. It could be animals. For example, a dog or something like that. But give you an example. Last weekend, I was staying in Gloucester, and interestingly, in a Airbnb right by the docks there. And at 5 a.m., the seagulls were ridiculously loud. And it was, I just imagine living there all the time. It would be horrendous. But of course, that's really difficult to discover about a property until it's all too late. I mean, you're not exactly going to go and get a booking to see a property, go and go do a viewing at 5 a.m. in the morning, are you?
Can't control the seagulls, Paul, but you can control everything else. If it was another pet next door or something, you could. But
Yeah,
the seagulls are just not. You just got to make sure next time you ask for a room behind the hotel, not on sea view, so you don't get the seagulls or
yeah.
whatever you got.
So I
But
guess, I
yes,
guess,
I've done.
I guess the subsequent question would be, what's the sound insulation like around the windows?
Well, that of course now has to be improved, as you know, under the new rules, and try to increase the EPC to a minimum of C,
Yeah,
or a level would have to increase. In the future would have to be improved vastly, and it may be that the seagulls may not be heard in the future, and when the double glazing becomes triple glazing or something. And
yeah.
but yes, I take your point there. It
It
could be
was
anyone.
horrendous.
Anyone or
So,
anything.
so the next question is, how long has it been on the market? Which is an interesting one. And the suggestion here from Scott Clay is that do your homework beforehand and look at how long it's taking properties to sell in that area. And then look at how long this one's been on. It might be overpriced, but there might be other reasons why it's not selling. Isn't that right?
Yes, so fortunately or unfortunately, depending how you see it, in the old days, prior to the portals, the Rightmove, the Zooplas of this world, and so forth, they actually now register and show the date when that property was uploaded onto the site. It leaves a footprint of what is going on in the marketplace for that particular property, or any particular property of that area. So that could get. Now, so sometimes they are on or off because they might have changed agents. So it was on the market previously with an agent, they took it off, and now it's revitalized, renewed again with a new agent. And so the date. But yes, you can actually check all of that now. Whereas originally, back in my younger days, such things were not available, and you could probably have winged it to a point and said, "Oh, it's just come on the market 2 weeks ago" or something like that. But that data is fully available now, and it is a good question. But there are many reasons again of why it may have been back on or off or during that period. Now, you have to also allow for the fact that there may be sales that have happened in that period, and sales that may have fallen through. So it might be that it was perfectly well under offer, or sale agreed, or sold subject to contract, as we covered last week. But any of those reasons could change, on the basis that people will turn around and say, well, actually, that sale fell through, and so that's why we're back to square one, in terms of looking for a buyer. But yes, and they do tell a story. Time does tell a story, and one of those stories is going to be based on value. Maybe the property is overvalued, but that doesn't always mean it's the agent that's overvalued it. It's also that the seller may feel that they want to stick to their guns and achieve a particular price, or they need to achieve a particular price to make the sale happen for the circumstances that they may wish not to discuss at a viewing.
It'll be interesting to see what our audience thinks of our good questions. So we're coming up to number 5 in the questions in a second. But if you've got a question you think is very handy to ask or that you always ask when you go on a viewing, do put it in the comments section below, and we'll bring it up on the screen and we can discuss it here live on the show. Last one is, have you had many viewings or offers? And of course, this last 2 years, Joe, as we've had the race for space, of course, literally it can be booked out with viewings within a matter of hours, can't it? Difficult one.
It is. It also is a difficult one because, of course, over the last 2 years, a lot of virtual viewings have happened. So, how do you define how many people have actually seen? Because they might have seen an entire video of it on the right move or on the website, showing how many people have actually viewed or looked at. But of course, that data is not available to the individual. So you can actually say as many as you like or as few as you like in terms of that part of it. But yes, it is important to understand, and it also tells a story. If there's a lot of viewers on that particular property, clearly it's a property of interest to people, and there is a likelihood a offer will be coming very soon, if not already on the table for discussion. But of course, if there are fewer viewings, it is because it's not as of interest. Also, it depends on the property pool, because some properties are not going to have volume viewings. A big property, expensive at maybe a couple of £3 million, is not going to have 25 people viewing it. It's probably going to have 3 to 5 people viewing it. Whereas something that is perhaps at a lower value, because there are more people that are able to be in the marketplace to look at those, may have a higher number of viewings, and especially doer-uppers and things like that. Properties that need modernizing of any shape or form will probably have a good queue of looking at, because television programs that have been aired for years now have shown people that they can do amazing things for £5. And it's amazing that you can't do nothing for £5. But the fact is that that's how they sell the idea, that you can go to a place and all of a sudden you can get a whole room refurbished, redesigned, for a fraction of the money, and that's going to help you increase the price, and subsequently it's a great buy. So there's a lot of things that go on in the background as far as that's concerned.
So let's move on to our second topic to discuss today, which is something that we have covered in the past, probably about 4 or 5 months ago now, maybe even longer than that, Joe. But that's the most cost-effective additions that you can make to your home, or upgrades you can make to your home. So we did cover, I think, the 20 over 2 programs back in November, if I recall correctly. But there's some up-to-date research being done by Barrows and Forrester, and they're basically saying the number one upgrade that you can do to your home is to add new insulation. Insulation costs around £2,750 to do that for the average house, but it can boost the property price by 3%. So if you take the average UK price now, £273, that adds another £8,500 to the value of the house, and so therefore your profit on that investment is £5,463, which is not to be sniffed at, particularly as we're talking about the fact that all homes have to get to EPC, as you mentioned letter C within the next few years. So looks like a good investment for insulation. But is it worth, the other sub part of that question to you, I suppose, is even if you have got insulation, should you upgrade it on a regular basis? Does it degrade in some way, or is it once it's done, it's done?
I think the answer to that question is I wouldn't know the actual longevity date of a insulation, but one assumes that there must be some time in that insulation where wear and tear or general, a wastage happens to it. So perhaps given a 10-year or 15-year time span, there may be that needs to be upgraded. But there might be other reasons why it needs to be upgraded, not just generally because of its condition, but maybe something's happened in the property, or there has been a roof leak or a tile that's moved, and subsequently that's caused the insulation in the loft to be looked at or got damaged. And also wall insulations that needs to be injected into the walls. You have a mixed bag of answers and stories on that, Paul. And I've had mixed bags of views from people. People have had insulation done and sometimes regret having it done because it's caused other damages. You have to remember that certain types of property in certain given times when they were built were not built for insulations to be done to. So you imagine going back to the 1930s, 1920s, turn of the century, century ago, those properties were not designed for someone to stick a drill through the wall and then pump it with some sort of insulation that then could cause another issue. But in the short and immediate term, the insulation is the right answer by saying you should have it insulated because it's going to reduce your energy costs, which of course are now exorbitant, and it's going to be able to assist you with this and that and the other. But on the other side of the coin is that you could create damage to the property, which was actually not designed for insulation at that point. So you really must think about that. And I can tell you, having spoken to these insulation guys over the years, they're not experts. They don't know as to whether it is. They just know that that's their job and that's what they're going to do. But do they know the answer to what it could do to that particular property if that insulation was done and it wasn't done correctly? The question is, have they damaged your property more or what? The other side of that, of course, is making sure that your insurance, your household buildings insurance, is looked at, and make sure that they are going to be covered for that. Because it could be that someone does do some sort of insulation into the walls and then finds that has created a damage, which subsequently means a claim on the insurance. And what you don't want to do is the insurance company turn around and say, well, actually, when you insured this, you actually didn't tell us about, or you did say, or we didn't tell you, or it says in our policy you're not allowed to do this without asking us. All the above, that information. So do check your insurance policies as well as the type of company and the persons that are going to do it. There are many people out there that are not perhaps qualified correctly, but actually offer the service. So the answer to that particular question, Paul, I know I seem to go on about this, but I like to make sure I get this home right, is that yes, insulation is important, but make sure that it's done correctly, and it will enhance, obviously, your value of your property if it's done correctly. Equally, it could damage your valuation very much if it's not done correctly.
The second one's one of your favourites, Joe, and that's the electric car charging ports, which, despite, now you see the old electric cars and the hybrid cars around everywhere, don't you? They're quite commonplace now, but it's still very rare to find a charger on a home, which makes you wonder where all these people do get their cars charged, in actual fact. But installation is relatively inexpensive. It costs £800 thereabouts to do it. It can add 1.5%, can you believe this, to the home's value, adding a further £3,306 in value. If it's only £800, it's amazing that people are prepared to pay nearly £3,500 on the price of the property just because it already has it installed. I wouldn't have thought it was that much of a challenge to do that job.
No, it's not. And installation of a charger is now also part of a lot of car sales prices. So especially the new ones, what they
Mm,
tend to do is sort of say to you, look, if you buy a electric vehicle from us, we will also include an installation of a charger at your property as part of the value. So if you can afford to go and get a brand new or a new electric vehicle, then 800, 1,000, £1,500 added to the figure in the grand scheme is probably not going to cause you a huge amount of problems. But yes, it is now becoming a necessity for those that are looking to have a charger at home. The worrying thing about having so much electricity charging points for pretty much everything, I mean, just think about how much electric we are now drawing on just in our own families. How many laptops, computers, and God knows wherever else, machinery, electrics, this, that, the other, are being plugged into the walls for all that electric. And I know everybody says that that's the way forward, but it comes a time when even that's going to become a challenge in order to do
mm.
that. And now, if you're going to start, charging your cars, that's also another extra burden on the electricity on the. And of course, as we all know, that as of 1st of April, all charges went up, and so you think you've compensated for it by making all electric, but you will pay through it. There's no such thing as a free lunch.
No, I was talking to somebody about this the other day, actually, funny enough, and I saw an article on the news this week. One of the London boroughs is actually providing a service where they're actually putting sort of a drainage lane or line across the pavement, so that the cable can go out from your front gate and then be lowered into this drainage drain. I suppose is the best description of it. It's a sort of a they literally cut the stone and put a little metal um, well, I can't think of the word, line in there, and you can sink the cable in, so there's no trip hazard, basically. Um, and they're offering that service to people who want to have it. So a bit like when they lower the curb so that you can go up and down on your drive, that kind of thing. I'm sure there's a cost associated, but it does solve the problem of the trip hazard, because obviously your insurance is not going to like that if you've got something sat there that's a little bit sort of Heath Robinson in the way it's put together. But the other thing I did find out was that apparently some of these chargers are so clever now that when you plug the car in, it doesn't actually charge it there and then. It waits for the cheapest tariff electricity through, and also for the latest. So when the demand is lower through the night, it might charge your car at 3 in the morning and do it through till 5 o'clock, because that was the most cost effective and also the least pull on the grid, which all sounds rather clever.
Very clever, actually. So clever that back in the days they used to have night storage heaters, and everyone and their uncle decided that that was a fantastic idea, only to find that they had these ginormous things stuck in their living room full of bricks that you couldn't hardly move. And no one ever actually worked out how this night storage heating worked. And amazingly enough, it was at the most inconvenient time when you actually wanted heating and it was cold. It was actually cold because it was not convenient for the storage heater to generate the heating out at that time, because it was most costly. So I'm not really sure whether the 3 o'clock in the morning charge is actually going to be effective. And the reason why they are going to put this time span on it, I mean, ask me to be negative about this. I'm the person that will be negative about this. And So they ask you to do that when it's actually cheaper energy. But of course, that's because there's a lot of draw on the energy of electric all over the place. And last but most importantly, you've got nothing else to do in your day other than to wait for your car to be charged at a most convenient rate, which means that you can't do anything else. So how much time do you put, how much money or value do you put on your time sitting around waiting for a cheap electric option to charge your car? Just put petrol in it and drive it down and get on with your life.
Right, other views are available, we might add at this point. The next one, while we're talking about cost-effective value adds to your home, boiler upgrade, the old notoriously expensive one. It's a good old-fashioned upgrade. It still costs around £2,500 to do, but it can add 1.9% to the value of the home, so adding £2,701 in value. It's an obvious one, really, and I guess if you haven't got haven't had a boiler upgrade, it's sensible to do so because it'd be more efficient these days. But also, of course, you've got this other question now about whether you should have another boiler or whether you should have one of these new, more eco-friendly options.
I think the boiler is a good option. I'm not going to really rubbish the boiler. It does what it says on the tin, to be perfectly honest with you. And At the end of the day, modernizing these things are part of what we have to do. They do last well, but I think as time goes on, I remember back in the day, which is obviously a long time ago because I'm not a young man anymore. But our boilers used to go on forever, and the servicing was really good and so forth. But their life seems to have shrunk now, and I wonder if it's more about rather than efficiency, it's about how many times you can sell a boiler. I often wonder and ask myself, how is it bed companies can be all over the country selling beds, but most people don't change their bed for about 25 years or 20 years. I mean, I know it's supposed to be 8 years, but so I don't know when and how they sell so many beds. So it's a similar sort of situation with boilers. Once they're in for a while, aren't they? So I think the modern boilers perhaps have been designed to break down in 3 to 5 years, as opposed to the old boilers, which were there for about 25 years.
Mm.
And You will have that experience. I mean, I've personally had those experiences. That's why I'm sharing that with you, and then saying that basically the older ones were maintained and sort of more hardy about what they had to do, but the modern ones have got so many more technical things in them that they are likely to go wrong much more quicker than they used to be perhaps in the older days. But a good boiler, is gonna, add value. Yes, people do like that. It is a immediate cost that can be put on someone if they're buying a house, and immediately, if it's an old boiler, they think, okay, well, that's something that I'm going to have to upgrade sooner. But if it's an upgraded boiler, it will certainly help achieve the better value.
Yeah. Next one was double glazing. We're almost there. 6,500 on average to put that into the home, and it's going to add 3% to the value of the property. So £1,638 is the profit. So it's an obvious one, and it would, of course, cut out the seagull noise.
Yes, it's important to make sure the seagull noise has been eradicated. My advice really is book a room at the back of the hotel rather than one.
Absolutely. Next one is quite interesting, really. LED lighting and roof repairs. It says here can generate a profit of £987. So we're coming down the list now, but increased efficiency of good lighting, and obviously the roof being sorted. They're all sensible things to do. But the lighting's not too much of a difficult one, really, is it? Because I mean, and checking things like the overall wiring is safe and secure. Having a check over maybe is probably a sensible thing to do.
I think an MOT on every property is as good as one. We have to have one on the car every year. Not that they're effective. Of course, law has come in now that prior to getting a gas certificate, it is on especially on tenanted and rented properties, electrical certificates are now becoming the norm as well. So to make sure that everything meets to current standards and upgraded. And there's no harm in any of this, because at the end of the day, it just means that your home is safer by making sure. The only thing is that there are operators out there that, because they know that they've got to do this, can get a little bit cheeky in their pricing. So do shop around and get the right one. It is hard to find the right people to do that, and it is hard to find the right people available at the right time. But yeah, I think it is paramount that you do have the basics, especially if we're going to be feeding electric cars as well, to make sure that your
Mm.
electric is up to scratch. Because the next thing you're going to do is, by having an electric car added and a meter added to your, a charger added to your system, you may put extra strain or pressure on the existing system that may short circuit I sound like an electrician. So make short circuit, and all of a sudden it causes you problems. So do check that out.
There is one cost effective, well, we're talking about cost effective additions to your home, but there is one, and you'll be pleased to hear this, Joe, because it's your pet hate. There is one that you should avoid because it will actually cost you money, or at least in the short term, but not in the long term. I think you know where I'm going with this. It's the solar panels, Joe. So this is
Yeah.
obviously a way of improving the carbon footprint of your home. So it's always a very sensible thing to do from that side of things. But installation is expensive. It says it's around £5,875, but it only adds £1,916 to the cost of the value of the property. So therefore, that's a loss of almost 4 grand putting that on. But of course, over time, your utility bills, especially these days, are going to be considerably lower, aren't they?
Yeah, I looked into this solar panel on a personal basis, Paul. So I'll just share that with you. And it's not just because it's a generally pet hate subject of mine, but the main thing about this is that first and foremost, they are so damn ugly. And you know, there has to be someone somewhere that's going to invent a solar panel or solar panel option that is a little bit more eye friendly. When you put all the time and energy into trying to make your house or your home attractive, not just for you to look at, but also perhaps potentially for a particular buyer or buyers to buy when the time comes round, and then you got these ugly, horrible panel things stuck on the roof. I just think they are ghastly, and then to top it all, they actually don't give you a good return on your money. It will probably take you about 15 years actually to get your investment back on the return of what it is that they're doing. So the idea is good. It looks ugly. It doesn't give you a return, but it's a tick box situation that says it's something I should do because environmentally it's the correct thing to do. Now, you know, if you're watching Dragon's Den, somebody would say, well, you know, or Thea Petitis would say, do I want to, you know, invest my grandchildren's money into something that's not going to give me a return for the next 15, 20 years of my life? I think the answer would be I'm out. So in this situation, I would have to say that do think seriously about what uh, panels you're going to put on and who it's going to be. That's going. I think the idea is great. I just don't think it's ready and it's not up there yet to be able to do that. I think solar panels are or solar heating or lighting or whatever it is a good thing. When I see them on the streets, for example, I think that's a great idea. I mean, you know, you could see lamps in areas where you can't get electricity, and they've got a little panel on the top, and that perfect. But on a very nice house that doesn't give you the returns, not so good. So do think carefully about what is important and what makes it work better. But they are ugly, I have to say.
Mm. I suppose wrapping this all up as a topic, you know, with the spiraling cost of energy in general, and therefore running a home and keeping it nice and warm and cozy, all of these things are well worth considering because ultimately you are going to save because you're going if you're particularly looking at things that are going to use less energy, then you're going to end up saving money in the long run.
Yeah, no, every idea that we've discussed today and every suggestion we made are all good housekeeping. They are important part of how to make our properties more sustainable, more economical. You know, save money, do all the right things. But some of them just don't make sense in the way they are. And unfortunately, you know, my view is to give you a very candid view about what I think and my experience and my understanding and the conversations that I've had with people that are doing this. I mean, you know, it's not something I just go out there and do myself. We speak to a lot of customers who have had these experiences and actually come back and say, you know, I wish I'd not done this. And so
Mm.
we learn from that, and it's because I'm learning from that I share it with our viewers, our listeners on our program, so that we all don't make the same mistakes. So if we don't learn from other people's mistakes, at least we don't want to make our own mistakes. And so it's important to understand that what the media says and what is important and what the marketing is great. But is it good in practicality? That's the question you have to really ask yourself. And there is a huge difference in this, isn't there? I've always said, what is a home as a house? What is important to you in your home may not be as important to you as a house, as an investor. Because then, but you should think about that in your investment too, because those tenants that are going to rent property from you may also make the same decisions on renting that particular property because of the facilities and the security and the cost saving precautions that have actually been taken in order to make sure that when they rent that property, that investment from you, they also enjoy the benefits as well. So it is an across the board situation to look at. Of course, you didn't add my favorite one in that list, of course, is the broadband there, Paul, as you know.
Yes.
And I'm surprised that you left that one out. Well, actually, I'm not surprised. I knew you'd say you were waiting for me to have a go at that point. But of course, broadband is now become a huge. In fact, I would say above that list of and the starting list of installation, broadband will probably put a much higher price on your property based on its quality. So it's very important to understand, because literally I would say 95% of us are carrying smartphones, electrical gadgets, Wi-Fi equipment, computers, working from home, all that kind of stuff. And if the broadband is not up to standard, you are going to consider moving to an area where it is, because it's only going to cost you that much more to try and get someone to try and keep boosters. You can spend hundreds of pounds on trying to buy so-called boosters for different parts of your house, and they boost diddly squat, but they're there to be sold. So broadband is very much paramount now, and a decent sized garden. Off-street parking is very important. Parking has become a number one issue. If there's a reason why you can have an argument with a neighbor, parking is a good reason for it, because because they always sit their car in front of your drive, or the edge of their car is in such a position that you can't actually get into your drive. So parking is important.
Or
With
it's
that
these,
becomes
or it's the scaffolding lorry that they park right in front of your front
or
window.
you got it, or the scaffolding lorry that's parked in front of it, or any of the vans and so forth that do it. So those are all things that are taken. And when I go back to the beginning of our program here, and I talked about the approach. Those things are really important. When you drive down there and you find that it's not your neighbour's fault. He works for a company that is giving him a van to drive around. But if you've got two vans parked next door and you're trying to sell your house, it just doesn't help,
No.
because that causes a problem.
Absolutely. Well, Joe, we're well over our allotted time. As always, it's always lovely to chat and to learn from the wisdom of Mr. Joe Joshi. Thank you so much indeed for all of your insight today. I hope that was of interest today. We were quite pleased to find such interesting topics that were hopefully informative and supportive in what is a difficult time in buying and selling property. It's a very crowded and busy market at the moment, so it's great to have that conversation, Joe. So thank you so much indeed, as always. And don't forget, of course, we'll be back for another Property Matters at the same time next week.